Oh, Jonathan. Never enjoyed that on the morning of his birthday. I don't think that's the way to go about it. And so it's talking about interpersonal relationships, and in fact we're getting into a section here where slaves and masters, children and parents, and wives and husbands, where Paul is getting more specific than what he has been in just talking about our general relationships with brethren, okay? And so he's kind of wrapping that section up before he gets real specific. But speak or address is talk and communicate to one another. The idea behind that, I think, is for the benefit of one another. So there seems to be some sort of an assembly just assumed in the tone of his discussion. Is it okay to sing alone? Well, certainly. Okay. So it's not restricting singing that way. It says in psalms, hymns and spiritual psalms, these three are kind of synonymous sorts of things. When he says the psalms, he could be specifically referring to the psalms themselves, Psalms 1 through 150. Okay. The strict Greek, I guess, behind the Psalms is a song played to the accompaniment of an instrument. Okay, we'll get to that in just a second here. Hymns, the idea of a hymn is a religious song of some sort. Spiritual songs, songs of a spiritual nature. Pretty much synonymous sorts of things right here. Singing and making melody. Singing is kind of speaking in a musical manner, making melody in your heart. So playing a guitar, horn, drum, saxophone, piano. None of those. They had musical instruments in the day, okay, when this was written. He's not speaking about those things. Making melody, the solo is the Greek word there for making melody, is to pluck something. And it says right here, the instrument to be plucked is the heart. Okay. It's possible to sing a song with it meaning nothing to you spiritually. Just singing the words. If you see these people singing opera, and I don't know if they actually know Italian, or if they just memorize the Italian words that fit. I don't really know. Beethoven's Ninth, all they mention. Okay, I don't know what those words mean in German. Okay, but I've listened to it enough times. Now, I've since gone in and figured out all men are brothers. It kind of comes from a poem at the time, I think. But can I really sing that with plucking my heart in a spiritual sort of manner? Not as much as if it were my native tongue. Okay. So, the instrument to be plucked is the heart, meaning that our heart must be involved in our worshipful singing to God. Okay. And I've said before, it does not matter, I don't think, to God whether you can carry a note in a bucket or not. That's just not the point of it.
That's why we make a grateful noise.
Yeah, G-R-A-T-E, right? Get that? There's a grateful noise, a thankful noise, and then there's a grating noise.
But the thing is when, how the writer and how the Holy Spirit is saying these things, he makes it very, very simple and easy in understanding. Because in the Old Testament, when David would do his songs, when he was talking about giving praise to God in those areas, he did mention instruments. He said, "Let us pluck the lyre," or the things like that. Here is completely different. It's for those who want to give musical instruments and playing this, people don't understand. I notice that for many times people are listening to the music and not singing. And
right.
when we bring that up to that, who are we worshiping? Who are we? Who are we pleasing? And the same situations with the chorus and things like that. And I explained explained to him, there's a difference between entertainment and worship. I said, how can you who are sitting back, you're saying that you're giving worship while somebody else is doing the actions? And it does make a difference, but a lot of times they've never heard that. My mom is one of those that will not attempt to come into the Lord's church because there's not a piano. And I said, well, Mom, I said, the piano's not doing anything and there's no salvation in that piano. I said, God wants to hear from us.
Yeah.
And that's what he's making this point of.
Right. Yeah, I came out of that tradition, okay? That's the way I was raised and everything else, and once I began to understand the argument that was being made, I really couldn't answer the argument very well. And I attended with my grandmother one time and asked her about it, and she said, well, it wouldn't sound like much without the piano. And I'm thinking, you don't sound like much with the piano, because everybody's following the piano, and nobody's really getting into it. Nobody is really worshiping. They're trying to follow a piano. And Ron and I visited a congregation right after we went out to Washington the first time. That the piano and the organ were going in two different directions. I was convinced they had different songs that they were playing, and it was just pandemonium. And it really started to click. Yeah, there's a problem here, and so much of it is oriented toward entertainment rather than worship. Yeah.
Well, I've been to weekdays or whatever. I've been to some more Pentecostal churches where they have a
band,
a whole band with or basically a rock band.
Yeah.
You guys know where I'm talking about in Ridgeville, and I mean it's like it's so loud you can barely hear yourself think, and it's like, yeah, this is not for edification. This is entertainment.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, we sat by the drummer one time, Ron and I, and they're banging out "Happy Birthday" to somebody. Well, is it about God anymore? Not at all. Not at all. And so, if those other things were required, okay, it's a directive. Make melody in your heart. Pluck. If you want to interpret it, that has to be a stringed instrument. Then what about somebody somewhere who does not have access to that? They're ignoring the command, right? Okay. They're unable to participate. Okay.
Hebrews chapter, I think it is 12 or 13, talks about that is a pleasing aroma for us to participate in the fruit of our lips.
Yeah.
It has nothing to say in that scripture about an instrument.
Yeah.
And the thing is when we are in worship, we are, as God's children, remember what Jesus told us. Jesus told the woman at the well, there will be a time when we will no longer worship at this mountain or that mountain. But God wants his worshipers to worship him in truth and in spirit. If we do not use our spirit, and when we're singing and we're giving vocal, we are offering our vocals to God.
Right.
And I see so many that just don't. And I ask this, I'm not here to judge, but don't you want to? Oh, I sound terrible. I said that doesn't matter to God. It's our part of our. It's a great honor to worship God, and if it's in a building, if it's outside or anything like that, we should be grateful. We should be wanting to do this.
Right. If you turn over to 1 Corinthians 14, I think this sums up the issue pretty well. 1 Corinthians 14:15. What am I to do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. I will sing praise with my spirit, but I will sing with my mind also. That means we've got to be engaged in our singing. I think it's what God wants out of us, to be engaged in it, to be understanding what the words on the page mean. Okay, understanding as we sing that to sing with a thankful heart and mind. Jonathan.
Comment and question that you may decide not to answer. I've read articles by evangelical, much more liberal types that are verging on comical in that they look at their band situation and specifically when they realize that probably because someone has more talent than they do, that person is doing, their special worship leadership or whatever because of their own specific talent. And so they call that out and say, oh no, we need to stop making worship about that person's talent, which is a problem that's completely avoided by avoiding all the instruments and all that kind of stuff anyway, and they recognize that manifestation of it, but then so they kind of bring it back to, we need to step back to, just having an entire band instead of one person or something like that, and it's a tradition thing, and because they can get so locked into a base tradition that smaller traditions outside of that they don't recognize. Obviously, we can do the same thing. Think about Afton with the terrible seating arrangement where nobody could see, and we just had to keep it that way, and it just doesn't make any sense at all, and it's hurting people's ability to pay attention. The question is, talking about people needing to have our minds engaged when we're singing, and you may not have considered this since it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference here, but like when we were in Italy, all the songs are being sung in Italian. You go to some place in New York, Bible study, something like that, songs being sung in Spanish.
Yeah.
I don't know Spanish. I might be able to pick up a word here or there. I may even be able to think some of the words from the English version of the song, which may be a completely different song
Yes.
than what they are singing. But I can't sing it in English, I don't think, because the Spanish person next to me will then be confused. Do you not sing at all? Is that a situation where you should just really try to avoid?
Or singing your
I
heart.
wouldn't try to avoid, I wouldn't go out of my way to find it, but if you're there with the locals, I mean, Paul was traveling around, okay? And he was in places that presumably spoke different languages. Now, Koine Greek was the common thing back then around the realm, but they wouldn't have probably been, they would have been doing Aramaic when he was back in Jerusalem. He was able to work it out somehow, okay? So maybe it was just the predominance of where he was at, that he'd kind of go with whatever that was. He had that ability. I understand what you mean, because sometimes the words are so strongly keyed to our memory of the music, okay? And that's why you can hear a jingle from when you were growing up. I'd like to teach the world to sing, okay? If you're growing up when that was on the television, you can still remember what that's about. It brings back the pictures of people up in the hills singing about it with a helicopter flying around and everything else. It's a very strong interplay between your visual memory and your oral memory. That's the way God created us. And how's He want us singing? Making melody in our hearts. Singing with our mind and our spirit. So that those same things come into conjunction when we're praising God.
I'm here to say it.
Yeah.
And in a situation such as Jonathan describes, there's a point at which it goes, okay, this is not a reasonable worship opportunity for me. It's a good learning opportunity. You have to start somewhere if this is going to become a common thing, and you're hoping to learn a language and, that kind of thing. But without your mind being engaged in terms of understanding what you're saying in that sense, you are learning, and that's what you're doing. It's like when we're learning a new song in English that we don't know.
Yeah.
We are not focusing on worship at that point. We're learning.
Right. Yeah, those are interesting circumstances to be in, though. I think, because you do.
For everyone to experience at least a couple times.
Yeah, I think part of what's nice about it is you realize, hey, I'm not alone in the world. Every time zone, as this world turns on the first day of the week, I'm convinced there are Christians in that time zone worshiping God. Okay, and so on the first day of the week, I kind of have this idea of songs being raised from the earth to heaven because of Christians praising God. What do you think?
But when you said that there's people in every time zone worshiping God, that's what makes when we would go to like the homeschool camps or the leadership camps and stuff like that, and seeing all the Christians from all around, at least, it's just like in the homeschool camp just around the country, but still, it's so encouraging to know that we're not the only ones that are Christians that are worshiping God. Because sometimes up in the North Country, there's like where there's only one church in an hour radius. You know,
Or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Go to Canada.
Yeah. So
5 or 6 hours.
So it's very encouraging to find out how many other Christians there are.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that the knowledge that we are doing exactly what God has asked of us, okay, we are praising Him. But because we are praising Him, it is good for us as well.
Yes.
Okay? Is it good for us if we are doing something that is not what He asked? It's not doing us any good at all. Because we're not doing what He asked. He asked us to do it this way. If we do it that way, it will also be good for us. If we ignore that, it's not going to build us up. Okay? It's going to make us weaker and weaker. So we have to follow what he says. I think music is a very easy place to see that working out.
Yeah, well, that's going to get in Colossians 3:16. That's the
Yep.
teaching part.
Yep.
I mean, there it is, right there. You
Yep.
just said it.
Okay. All of the questions we referred to Gary in Colossians. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I'm in Corinthians again. Okay. Page up verse 20. Giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. So giving thanks. I think this is partially pointing back to the singing issue. Singing and praise are meant to be understood as means of giving thanks to God. One of the ways. God is the object of the praise. Okay. And in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, meaning with His authority. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Trusting in Jesus as our mediator to God. And then submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. I think he's starting to point forward to here to wives and husbands. At least there is an application to be made forward. Looking back at what he has said, this idea of submitting to one another is, we're still in a little bit of the generic realm of, how do I say this? The generic realm of our relationships with one another before we get into these very specific relationships that he's going to talk about, okay? The general rule here, submit to one another, okay? Count others as more important than yourselves, okay? That kind of wraps up that idea. Yeah. Okay, we good there? Okay. Starting, let's read 22 to 24. Now he's going to get into these more particular personal relationships. So he's going to do wives and husbands, children and parents, and slaves and masters. So let's read 22 through 24. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Gary and I were talking the other day. You notice there are 3 verses here that deal with wives. Husbands get 9 verses.
Well, after we said that, I kind of eased off and said maybe the husbands get 5.
Well,
because the last 4 there, you can kind of. So we got more than the wives.
Yeah.
You're right on that.
Yeah.
We're thicker headed, I guess.
Okay. I'm not sure why my slides are not going like they would. So, the general rule, submit to your own husband. The Greek is hupotasso. It's also found in Romans 13:1, Ephesians 1:22, 5:21, Titus 2:5 through 9, James 4:7, 1 Peter 2:13, 3 and 1. I'm not going to look at those, but the idea of submission is out there all over the New Testament. No surprise there. The reason that is given, the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Does she have to submit to anyone else's husband? What did we just say above? Submit to one another. So there's that submit to one another.
But then it's a deeper level of
in the relationship of a husband and a wife, she is told to submit. Okay? Does she have to submit to elders? Yes. Other brethren, yes. the context here, 22 through 33, is wives and husbands. And so in that relationship, the husband's the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. So if we want to deny the one, then we're denying the other. And the other one is undeniable. So I think it's a pretty iron case. Now, the modern feminist will look at this verse and they will dismiss the entire Bible over this one verse right here. That's what they do. They see that and they close their mind, and I don't want anything to do with that because of that. They won't look beyond that verse of submission, even 2 verses down, to see what husbands are to do in return. Or not even in return, but what their responsibility is to begin with. And I think that that's something that we've got to understand about the modern feminist movement, whatever it is that you want to call it. In a lot of ways, they've made that an argument about worth, and it has nothing to do with that at all. So, but Satan works in a lot of ways. Okay, so since the church submits to Christ, wives should submit to their husbands. And then what are the limits that are out there? Any limits to that?
As to the Lord.
Yeah, as to the Lord.
Yeah.
As to the Lord.
So I mean, a Christian woman who will not submit to her husband, she really isn't done any. She's no better off than the feminist who won't submit to the Bible at all.
Right.
Because, I mean, you're to submit to your husband as you would to the Lord.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Now, there's no, the understanding is there, okay, as to the Lord.
Right.
Nothing explicit that lays out what those limits are, okay, but it's understood that if her husband's demand conflicts with the law of God,
Right.
then she's obligated to follow God, what God says, and disregard what her husband says. With the understanding that I better make sure I'm understanding this right, because I am going to answer for it.
Right.
Okay? Even
It goes back to Acts 5:29. We have to obey God rather than man.
right. So, I think the same situation kind of happens in employer-employee relations. It's not just wives and husband.
Right.
You do what your employer says unless it's the wrong thing to do. It could be morally wrong and you tell them, no, I won't. It could be legally wrong. You tell them, no, I won't. You know, that's when the phrase, put it in writing, becomes very important. Because when your employer tells you to break the law, tell them to put it in writing, and now you've got a cause of action if you're fired over it. Okay? Because you have disobeyed an unlawful thing. In the military, the understanding is an unlawful order, not just you don't have to obey it, you must not obey it.
Right.
Okay? You must not obey an illegal order or an unlawful order. You must not. And there will be a trial. And there will be peers that are looking at this and saying, no, you did the right thing. And that's what they expect them to do. In history, there are some big instances of this. Anybody think what they are? What is it? The King. Maybe a little bit. Nobody would recognize that, though. Okay? Starts with an N. After World War II, Nuremberg. I get chills thinking about it. Nuremberg. Okay? That was the war trial afterwards over in Germany. I think it was in Germany. Was it in Germany? Okay? Of the war criminals from Germany that gassed the Jews, did all kinds of things that should not have been done. And they held them. The defense was, I just did what I was ordered. And the response was, that's not good enough. You should have said no. Because there's a higher law than Herr Hitler. But in the military we taught it over and over. An unlawful order, you are to say no. And what does that require?
Courage.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
you may still end up not in the army or
Yeah.
whatever, and
Right.
because of that.
Right.
Because
Hey, before courage, what's it require?
Knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah.
Knowledge.
Yeah, you got to know what it is that constitutes an
that goes back
unlawful
to
order.
this, what does the Lord say?
Yeah.
You got to
Exactly.
know what He says.
Yep. So, in this passage here, 22 through 24, it's basically laying down the law, I think, that someone in the marriage relationship must ultimately be given the authority and the responsibility and be held accountable for what they do. And God lays that obligation on the husband. So, if you're thinking about getting married, don't get married to an abusive jerk. Okay? Because it's not going to be fun.
He doesn't know love to be handled.
Right.
Yeah, this, I mean, yeah, all you just said, yes, but this spells out love. I mean, Christ died
Yep.
for the church.
Yep.
Husbands, be willing to die for your wife.
Right. Yeah. Submit's easy to understand, right? Very easy to understand. Really hard to carry out.
Principle and principle and application here. We started this conversation. You asked, does a wife have to submit to somebody other than her husband? Just to kind of start that conversation. When the responsibility of authority is accepted correctly, concerns like that never have to come up. In other words, what I'm saying is we see all these problems within what we're reading here, not problems, but what do you do with this and this and this, and all those entail a starting point of somebody wasn't doing their job. And when everybody's accepting their responsibility the way they're supposed to, whether a wife is submitting to her husband or an elder or somebody else, it all lines up. And I think the lack of that is one of the reasons why the feminist movement has become what it has, because as men abdicated their responsibility, women saw that authority as nothing more than an excuse to get out of effort. Because a woman who sees a man exercising his authority properly does not want that position because it's a heavy, heavy role.
Yeah.
And when they give it up, suddenly it looks like some sort of attractive status to be in. And it is, I'm not going to say it's not, but it's not necessarily, and
it looks attractive because it's been misused.
right, exactly. Yeah,
So-
that's my point.
Yeah. Okay. So husbands, let's see, 25, we'll read to 33. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, talking about the obligations of the husband here, and I'm really not going to go into too much of a word by word thing through this. There are principles in here that need to be talked about, but it starts off, love your wife. And the model for the love your wife is the way that Christ loved the church. Okay? How did Christ love the church? How did he show it? By dying for it. Okay? So the husband is supposed to model that same sort of thing in his marriage. Really, I think also most anything that you see in the Bible about what Christ did for the church can be applied to what a husband ought to be doing for his wife. Okay, there's probably something out there, so I won't say everything, but most everything there is a model for that. We have to understand that idea of giving up. And he may not be able to give up in everything. Okay? And it may seem at times that he's given up nothing at all. And submission gets harder and harder in those cases, but the submission is still there. It says, sanctify her, set her apart. Christ sanctified the church so the church would be holy and blameless. Okay? Same idea for husbands for their wives. The love your wife as your own body. You care for your body, you don't do anything to hurt it, so you care for your wife and not do anything to hurt your wife. Nourish. Nourish and cherish. Nourish is the idea to provide for in terms of sustenance, okay, but also emotionally nourishing. Cherish Cherish, to hold or treat as dear. So they're slightly different things, okay? They're a little bit synonymous, but nourish is the idea is provide. Cherish is to hold dear, okay? It's not the main point of the passage here, but it's true in passing that we also have an obligation to take care of our bodies, right? It assumes that we understand that. I'm not sure that we always do, but we're to take care of ourselves physically, just by virtue of the fact that God gave us, He put our spirit into a body, okay? And we're to take care of that body. We're not to abuse ourselves. Sounds a little bit odd, but it ought to be understood. Yeah, Brian?
Do you consider this, he's just speaking when he's talking to husbands and wives, do you think he's just talking about Christian husbands and wives? Or should we, as human beings, we have a lot of people who are not Christians, and when it comes to the areas of marriage, they have their own thoughts. They hear the old ways of old day.
Right.
And that, but the thing is they've never seen. They may have never read that you're supposed to love your wife as your own body, and we see the deterioration and the lack of love, the lack of respect in it. Some people say, well, if I'm not a Christian, I don't have to honor those things. You're my wife, you're basically my slave, as long as
Right.
I'm working and doing the things like that. You know, yes, this is giving us an example of how we, the children of God, should be acting. But when we interact with people that are not Christians, this is mind-blowing.
Yeah, God's general revelation, okay, includes the physical laws of the universe like gravity and everything else. I think there are specific revelations from God in regards to marriage that are kind of the same way. Really, if you want your marriage to work, you're going to follow God's law, whether you are a Christian or not. A Christian doesn't have to, in the sense that they are lock, stop, chained to follow God's rules, okay? It's still a free will universe. But I think that anybody who follows God's pattern, even if they're not a Christian, will have a better marriage than if they did not follow God's pattern. Now, there are still other problems out there, and people may think they've stumbled across additional good ways to do it. Okay? I think they're misinformed. They've fooled themselves, Gary.
Well, there's two things I thought of when Brian was bringing out. One thing was is God's law universal?
Yep.
All man, all time,
Yep.
forever. The other thing was, where does all right and wrong come from? It comes from God.
Right.
So, man may think he's got a better idea, but God is where all right and wrong comes from.
Yep.
So,
Because God can see the end from the beginning,
that's right.
right? And so He
Who is God?
He knows where it's going.
He spoke, we're here.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. He knows where it's going.
Honestly, 2,000 years ago, he described the marriage scene a little better. And he put this down, so it doesn't matter if I'm not a Christian or not. This is still the standard he's going to hold you by
Yeah.
in the end. So it doesn't matter if you're a Muslim who following that law and beating his wife every day. God's going to judge him on this law, not his law.
Yep.
Because ignorance does not mean anything.
Yeah. The marriage relationship is an institution that God invented and
That's right.
designed, and it works. It really, according to His expectation, it works one way, His way only. And you could almost make the same argument that. So there's people out there who say, well, I'm married to this person, and we found this way to make it work, and it looks like something that is not God's design for marriage, and that is just as wrong as, well, I decided I'm going to marry another man, and that's what works for me. Those are equally not God's design for marriage, and just because something is working for you, whatever that means, you're happy with it, or it hasn't gotten you into enormous trouble, or whatever, doesn't mean that's an acceptable. Oh, you found something that works for you. That's great. No.
I'm not saying that every married couple in this room has worked out the same sort of limits within this framework, okay? I think that it depends on personalities, it depends on just a whole lot of things, where you're going to be on that continuum and everything else. But if the husband is not loving his wife as his own body, okay, then he's violating this.
Right.
Okay, and that's what we have to stay away from. You mentioned God. Verse 31 here is talking about the institution of marriage. It goes back to Genesis 2:24. Okay, a man leave his father, be joined to his wife. Those two will become one flesh. There are some questions I think that come to mind as I'm going through this that are kind of unanswerable sorts of things that make me kind of wonder a little bit. So I'm going to talk to them just a little bit. To what extent do the individuals in a marriage remain individuals? When God looks down at John and Rhonda, okay, we're one flesh. Does he see John and Rhonda, or does he see John and Rhonda?
John and Rhonda.
Okay, I think he probably sees both, but think about the implications of what our marriages mean to God. Okay, and you may have an answer later on for me. I don't know. There may not be an answer for it.
As you develop your relationship, it's more and more and more. Jen already knows what I say before I even, what I think before I think it. Rhonda probably knows what you're going to think before you even decide to do it.
Shaking her head no.
I mean, we've been together. In a way, it's not quite the same. But Christ is that way with God. He knows what God wants, but there's the Spirit involved in that. But there's still that frame mind. The closer you are to a person, the more and more you kind of interlink in thoughts and stuff. So that's where you would be one.
Yeah. If we kind of use this a little bit ourselves in our way of thinking, I think, and let me give you an example. Marcus says out loud to Crystal, I'm going over to John's house. Is he going to my house, John Moore's house, John Leslie's house? Is he going to, John Edwards' house? If he says, I'm going over to John and Rhonda's, now it's very specific. He knows. Because I think that we are spoken of together probably by members in the church. Referred to that way. Gary and Colleen, Steve and Isolde. Okay, those things we just naturally understand. That's the way it works because of the marriage that's involved. Okay, and I think there's got to be some sort of an aspect down there that when God looks at us as individuals, if we're married individuals, He's also recognizing, in a sense, a third person being there, or one person instead of the two that are there. And I think He's going to, He's got an expectation of how we are going to behave within that relationship because He tells us how to behave within that relationship.
And that's the illustration He uses of the church. How many members are there of the church?
Yeah.
But they're one.
Yeah.
In under Christ.
Yeah.
So yes, in some ways that's kind of a mystery.
Yeah.
But it's the way God designed it.
Right. If you turn over in 1 Corinthians 7, in verse 14, we've been talking about marriage here. There's this verse that, I understand the book answer on this, okay? Let me start it that way. I still wonder if I understand everything that Paul means when he says this. The unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. To what other extent that might apply, I don't know. Okay? And at some point, God is going to judge each of us as individuals. Okay? And again, I understand the book answer, how we normally respond to this verse and everything else. I don't know what else to say.
Data point only here.
Yeah.
Ananias and Sapphira.
Yeah?
She was condemned after she sinned individually.
Yep.
I'm just observing that. I
Yeah.
have no idea what conclusions to draw, but
Yeah. Yeah, and I do think that is going to be true of everyone.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay? But to what extent, while Sapphira had still unsinned, well, they're both believers.
yeah.
Okay, I think the context immediately right here is the unbelieving husband and a believing wife, or the unbelieving wife and a believing husband. I will say that I think it's very, very, very difficult for a Christian to have an unbelieving spouse.
Yes.
And the statistics on a successful or enduring marriage and things like that are not great.
No.
Difficult enough as it is, really anyway.
You know,
Yeah.
and there may be the point that he's drawing two people into an institution that he started into the closest relationship that there is on this earth.
Yep.
You know,
With another human.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he uses it like the church. When you are joined to the Lord, that
Yeah.
is the closest relationship there is. In marriage, in the same sort of way, you are joined in a relationship that God sees as,
Yeah, and I think there's a recognition in here that if a believer and an unbeliever are married, that believer will probably never become what they could have
right.
as a believer because they have an unbelieving spouse.
Yeah.
Not an issue of I'm going to leave my marriage over it or anything else, but I think there's a potentiality issue in there. So I do wonder when in 33 when Paul kind of summarizes, let each one of you love his wife as himself, let the wife see that she respects her husband. He's kind of summarizing things what he's talked about here. Do you think he's primarily using the example of Christ in the church to teach about marriage, or marriage to teach about Christ in the church?
It's both.
Primarily, though. I said primarily.
Christ in the church is a permanent one.
Yes, Christ in the church is the permanent one. George is right. He's
Yeah.
using that to teach about marriage. That's how
I think so. I think it does go both ways.
Yeah, but how can the marriage relationship teach
Just-
about Christ in the church?
Yeah, but I mean, when he says here, he says, this mystery is profound. And I'm saying it refers to Christ in the church. And he's just talked about them becoming one flesh. So he is kind of using parts, part of the marriage relationship, parts that they would understand,
Yeah.
to talk about, okay, this is a relationship that Christ has with the church.
It's a physical thing that
Yeah.
describes, I mean, just like altar sacrifice was a shadow of Christ's sacrifice, just like our children are a shadow of our relationship with the Father. It's a way of illustrating what the relationship is supposed to look like.
Yeah. In 33 there, when he talks about in 32, the mystery is profound. There's no indication Paul was ever married. Okay? So this is inspiration talking here,
Yeah.
not personal experience
Right.
for Paul. And it may have been why the mystery was so profound so far as he was concerned. And we've got 3 minutes left, and that's maybe more time than what this next section will be all about. And this is kind of personal observations here. I guess more about how to go about choosing a husband or a wife if you're in that situation. I think, first of all, understand what the God-given roles are for you and for your spouse. Okay? If you go into marriage without those things, you're going to have a little bit more difficult of a time until you get that worked out. That's got to be worked out, though. Choose someone who puts God first in their life. Okay? That will help smooth over a lot of things. And that means a husband has to set a personal moral standard which will allow his wife to easily submit. Choose someone who will help you get to heaven. We've heard that one before. who you marry will impact everything you do for the rest of your life. That's my grandparents' advice. I think that I've talked about that before. Janice is nodding wildly.
Pretty good advice. from
Yep.
grandparents.
Yeah, I mean, they were married over 50 years, maybe 60. So, if you have questions about choosing, I will say talk to me for advice. Don't talk to my wife, because she made a terrible choice, right? If you want to find out how to deal with a difficult spouse, go talk to my wife, because she's practiced at that. I am not. Okay, those are things that, finally,
You're
I would,
selling yourself short a little there.
well, I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Probably some of us men might agree with you.
Yeah, about me or about themselves is the
About
question.
themselves, not you in particular. I might say the same thing about my wife.
The other thing I'd say is, if you go into and you're evaluating somebody and you want to marry them because you think they can please you, you have got it backwards. It's backwards. It ought to be, do I want to spend the rest of my life trying to please that person? If you go into with that in mind, you'll be much better off. John?
This is why the courting process is so
Yep.
important. The speaking, finding out stuff, observing how a person handles other persons. Because if you see the abusive side on there,
Yeah.
that's your only chance to get out without messing up the whole marriage relationship at that point. But also, search yourselves too. Because Paul said, those who choose to be eunuchs stay eunuch. I mean, you have that thing. Hey, do I want to be married? Do I want this responsibility of another person? Do I want this ability to have to submit to another person?
Right.
I mean, all that stuff is including that. You just need to really search yourself before you decide to go into that, because once it's done, it's sealed. It doesn't matter what people say, it is sealed.
Yep. Okay. Any other comments? Thank you.